While preparing for UPSC, when we study ancient India or medieval India, two terms we come across. One is language, another one is script. Many of the UPSC students are not very clear about what is the finer difference between language and the script. So in this video, we are going to talk about language and script and the finer difference. So first, let us take language. So language is basically the communication of ideas, emotions or knowledge through sounds or through gestures. So there are two aspects, either sound or gestures. I will communicate my ideas to the listener or to the audience. For example, I am going. So certain idea is communicated to the audience. I am going. It means मैं जा रहा हूँ. I am going. So this idea through these sounds, I am going. So I'm making some sound and idea is reaching the audience. Similarly, मैं जा रहा हूँ. So I'm making certain sound and that idea is reaching to the audience. Now idea is same. So two different kind of sounds I am making. In one case, I am making sound I am going. In another case, I am making sound मैं जा रहा हूँ. But same idea is being communicated. So this is language. Language is communication of ideas, emotions, or knowledge through making certain sounds. So that is why so many different languages are there. Everybody communicate their ideas through their own sounds. And sometimes, for example, in case of deaf and dumbs, we use the hand gestures. So we can communicate ideas through hand gestures also. For example, if I do this, it means you are good, you are looking good, or you are brilliant. So with this gesture, I am communicating certain idea. So language is basically communication through sounds or gestures. Now, if the same emotions, knowledge or ideas, if I can write or whatever sounds I am making, if I can express those sounds in written form, in the form of symbols, that is called as script. So script is basically the presentation of the ideas or the sounds in the written form, in the form of symbols. For example, if I say I am going, so the letter I, A, M, G, O, I, N, G. So these are the symbols through which I am communicating the or I am representing the sound. So in this case, the language is English and the letters are Roman. Roman letters I am using. So script is Roman. So English language and Roman script I am using in this sentence. So if the same sentence I will speak like this, I am going, but I write it in Hindi. I am going. So I'm using Hindi letters to represent the same idea. So in this case, the language is English because I am making the same sounds. I am going. But the script is Devanagari because I am representing it through Devanagari letters. In the previous case, I represented these sounds through Roman letters. So language is all about sound and gestures. Script is all about presenting this sound in written form through symbols. So these symbols can be different as I have shown in the example. Now the question is why script was needed. For example, now I am communicating with you guys. So I am speaking, you are listening, and things will be over. The next person will not be able to hear. Previously, technology was not there, recording cameras, etc. were not there. So the people used to communicate their ideas, knowledge, emotions in the form of sound. But what if they wanted to communicate this knowledge, emotions, etc. to the next generation or in the later part of the time? So they needed script. So through script, what they used to do, they preserved the knowledge, the ideas or emotions which they conveyed. So this preserved knowledge could be accessed by the later generations. That's why script comes into picture. Now, if we see India's ancient past, we will see that Stone Age, which is comprised of Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic age. In that age also, the human being might be using language. Obviously, 100% they might be using language or making sounds for communication. But they did not present their ideas in written form. They did not preserve this sound in written form. So for Stone Age, we might have some language, but the script is not available. Now, next we come on to the Harappan age. In Harappan phase also, they might be using certain language which is presented in the written form. The script is called as Harappan script. So this Harappan script is a pictographic script. It means the sound is represented in pictographic symbols. Now this script is not deciphered or decoded till now. So once this script is deciphered or decoded, we will be able to know what language the Harappan people were using. Now let us come on to the Aryan period or the Vedic period, which generally have the timeline from approximately 1500 BC to roughly 600 or 500 BC, 1000 years or 1100 years. In the earlier part of Vedic period, from 1500 BC to approximately 1000 BC, Rig Veda was composed. Rig Veda was composed by the sages or the priestly class. So these people, they were using Vedic Sanskrit language for composing the shlokas or composing the hymns or composing the poetry. Composing means they created in the form of sound. For example, if I say Om Bhur Bhuvaswaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yonaha Prachodayat. So I have composed this shloka, right? So this is the language part. So the Rigvedic people, they transferred this knowledge from one generation to another generation in the oral form only. So those 500 years there was no written form. The language used was Vedic Sanskrit, but there was no script used. Similarly, other Vedas, Samveda, Atharvaveda, Yajurveda, some portion of those Vedas were also composed orally and transmitted from one generation to another generation orally. Not only that, some portion of Upanishads were also composed orally and were transmitted from one generation to another generation orally. So there was no script during the period 1500 BC to approximately 600 or 500 BC. Now, the language spoken by the common people at that time was Prakrit. The language of the sages or the priestly class was Sanskrit, which is Vedic Sanskrit, and the language of the common people was Prakrit. Now, the written part of the language started in 600 BC or maybe 550 BC, around that time. The script used was Brahmi script. So, in the early part of Vedic period, the language of the common people was Prakrit, and when they started writing, it was denoted in Brahmi script. The Rigvedic literature was composed in Vedic Sanskrit. Now, Panini, a great scholar of the time, roughly around 300 BC or 400 BC, around that time period, he composed the grammar rules for Sanskrit. The Sanskrit which is based upon Panini's grammatical rule is called as classical Sanskrit. So Panini wrote a book which is called as Ashtadhyayi, in which grammar rules of Sanskrit are mentioned. So the classical Sanskrit is the Sanskrit which we guys are using today. The Sanskrit which we use today is based upon Panini's grammatical rules. So this is classical Sanskrit. The Vedic Sanskrit in which Vedas were composed was slightly different from this classical Sanskrit and slightly tougher from this classical Sanskrit. So it was also brought into written form in the later period. So that is the difference between classical Sanskrit and the Vedic Sanskrit. Now to summarize, the language is the sound part or the gesture part of the communication. If the same sound or the gesture part is presented in the written form in the form of symbols, letters, etc., that is called as script. So that's all for today. Thank you very much.